What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Took Trash, and stand back with another episode of Loving Wrestling for Fightful Overbooked. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Mr. Robert DeFelice from Fightful and Love Wrestling. So, welcome to the show, my friend. I'm excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here, man. I do love wrestling. So when you asked me to be on the show, I just felt like it was perfect. And like I've told you before, it's cool to see you on the Overbooked team, and I'm very happy and proud of you for all that you're doing.
I really appreciate that, man. Before we get too sappy, you know full well none of this stuff would have happened without your support and things
Well,
like
I
that. It's always
appreciate
great to
that.
catch up with you. So,
I
if we
appreciate
take this back, my friend, do you remember the moment, not that you first discovered wrestling, maybe, but do you remember the moment that you were like, yeah, I love wrestling now? Wrestling's my thing.
So the beautiful thing with me is that I really don't, because it's just always been there. And I can tell you that like there are videos of my second birthday party where I'm just glued to some VHS of King of the Ring 95. Like wrestling for way too long was the only thing I loved and was just all consuming for quite a while. And I don't know where I'd be without it, because honestly it's now, my job, and I just love almost everything about professional.
Mm. You brought up there something that I find very interesting, that at one point, wrestling was probably one of the only things you loved and it consumed you. So, did you have a moment where you were like, whoa, I focus on wrestling too much. I need to take a step back?
And I probably have had moments where I knew that, okay, it's cool that I'm focusing on other things, but I don't think I've ever had a moment where I've said, okay, this is too much wrestling, because the beautiful thing is there's always more to see and more to discover. And I've just always been like trying to find the next thing I haven't seen yet. But I
Mm,
will say that I probably found a better balance
mm.
around, probably after high school, as you like enter like the real world of certain things. And I found a better balance after that.
I really appreciate what you're saying there, my friend. So you brought up there the fact that you're always trying to discover new things in wrestling to love. So what is a match currently that you're like, this is the reason I love wrestling?
The match that is the reason I love wrestling, always and forever will be, is Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon in their ladder match. I grew up, I had the VHS of the SummerSlam one. I watched that ridiculously until about 2003-ish. I got the Shawn Michaels from the Vault DVD that had the WrestleMania 10 ladder match. I have probably seen that ladder match maybe 100 times. Like, without exaggeration, I think I've seen that match so much, because it's kind of like a comfort match for me. But I mean,
Yeah,
there's so many different matches that say, yeah, I love wrestling because of this. I mean, most recently, that Omega Osprey match at Forbidden Door was just like, oh, this is the beauty of like a wrestling story done right. And yeah, I just love when the match makes sense, when the story makes sense, when it's like two characters that you really care about. There's very few forms of entertainment more engaging than pro wrestling.
mm. You brought up there the fact that there's no more engaging entertainment for you than wrestling. What is it that keeps you engaged in wrestling currently, whether it be a show, a particular angle, things like that? Keeping in mind, guys, we are recording this in August 2020, on the 20th of August 2023. And by the time this airs, these angles and things might be over.
Well, I will say I am a full blown collider. I think Collision, the pacing of Collision, the way who's on the show, the way it plays out, it really reminds me a lot of what I grew up enjoying. So right now I'm all about Collision. In terms of angles, I love what MJF and Adam Cole are doing. Of course, I don't know how that story has progressed by the time this airs, but I
Because
think
we're
it's
recording
been
this the week before All In. We'll point that
right. We're
out.
recording this right before they do the world title match in Wembley. I think Adam Cole's like one of the best wrestlers of all time. I
Mm.
think he's the perfect embodiment of everything I love about wrestling. He's like that evolution of Shawn Michaels. MJF is so good, and he's so young, and he's only gonna get better. And they really encapsulate what I love, which is like the character aspect, and they have that showmanship in their entrance, and the whole thing. It's the perfect balance of entertainment, and once the bell rings, they're gonna kill it,
Mm.
and that is where I kind of sit in what I love about pro wrestling.
We brought up All In there and things like that, and pay-per-views. So who do you love watching wrestling alongside if you're watching wrestling for fun, or if you have to watch it for Fightful?
So I do watch wrestling with a couple of friends occasionally. Like there's my buddy Michael. I've been friends with Michael now for over a decade, and we watch a lot of the WWE pay-per-views, some of the AEW stuff. Um, I met someone earlier this year that I really enjoy watching the shows with. Her name's Megan. She's a very like she gets so intense when watching the shows, and it's a lot of fun for me because sometimes I get bogged down in the work of all of it, and it kind of keeps me grounded in that, like, yeah, be a fan first.
Mm.
So there's that. There's also I have a friend, Shivani. Love getting the chance to sit down and watch wrestling with anybody, really. Like, 'cause that's a lot of what wrestling was for me in the very beginning. I grew up watching it with my brother and our cousins and whoever came over to the house for the pay-per-views. Like, wrestling to me is better when it's in a communal setting.
Mm.
Like, there's a reason why the shows are always better when you go in like groups with your friends and stuff like that. It's meant to bring out the best in people, even though sometimes it can also bring out the worst.
Mm. You brought up there something very interesting, and this isn't on a list of questions, but you and I did a great podcast about content creation with cerebral palsy about a year and a bit ago, and I'm very curious to know what do you do if, like, because obviously you work for two great sites, Fightful and Love Wrestling. We'll talk how you got into working for those sites in a minute for people that may not know. What do you do if, like, you see a comment of like, you've got a physical disability, you shouldn't be doing this, blah blah blah. How did you get here? Blah blah blah. How do you navigate negative comments, basically?
So thankfully, I don't get a lot of those. Like, luckily for me, the only comments I've ever gotten about my CP are from wonderful people like you who just want to know how I got there so they can follow suit. I
Mm.
haven't had to deal with too many negative comments. Occasionally I'll get them because I'll have like a stupid typo or something. But like I deal with it the same way a lot of people seem to say they deal with these things. It consumes you for about an entire day, and then eventually you work your way back. But thankfully, like I said, I'm luckily in a very supportive system where I haven't had to deal with too much of the negative of that.
I understand completely what you're saying there. You talked about the being in a very supportive system, content creation wise, and things like that. So that is a beautiful segue, my friend. For people that may not know, how did you join the Fightful crew? How did you start doing the Love Wrestling Ring of Honor show with Kyle Sparks and Kylie and things like that, my friend?
So I joined Fightful because I've been doing this job in general since 2018. I started at Russell's, and I actually still like the team at Russell's, and still fantastic. I still work there, still love it. I got a DM from Sean asking me what my schedule was, and I didn't realize who that was at first. I thought it was weird that like somebody was asking me my schedule, and then luckily I did answer him when he offered me the weekend position because I was a bit doubting myself at first, and you've experienced this. I
Oh,
wasn't
definitely.
sure that I was at like that level, but thankfully I took the chance. Yeah, thankfully Sean took the chance on me, and I'm now like the second longest person there, right behind Jeremy. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
been a wonderful 4 years. My birthday was just this past Wednesday on my 26th. I joined Fightful, and on my 30th, I'm still here 4 years later. And they're a tremendous team, and I'm so lucky to work with them. With the Ring of Honor show, kind of the same deal. Kyle just reached out and said, "Hey, man, you want to do this?" And I said, I really do because I don't get the chance to do this be on camera as much as I would like.
Hmm.
So again,
See,
just lucky to be around such wonderful, kind, giving people.
I think you need to also say to yourself, man, you've earned everything you've got. This is something that you was telling me about myself off camera. And I was like, so have you, man. Like, you
Oh,
need to
thank you.
remember you put the work in those 4 years. That's why people are reaching out because you're good at what you do. Do you know what I
I
mean?
do. I do appreciate that. Thank you. I could do with more. I love wrestling enough. Like I could extend that love to myself more often than I do. But it's a work in progress, as you know very
Oh,
well.
definitely. So you talked about there. What are some of the differences? Not to compare the companies, but have you noticed any differences when you're podcasting for Fightful, for example, and then when you're podcasting on the Love Wrestling show?
So with Fightful in general, and this is what I always say, Fightful is a very engaging platform. Like whereas a place like Love Wrestling or a place like WrestleZone or like really anywhere, a lot of it's about the content. Fightful and the people that follow are very much about the interpersonal interactions. Like the things that Kate and Alex do with Sour Graps is insane. And the community that they've created there is tremendous. This entire like platform is largely due to the connection that Sean has built, not only, with other like companies and things like that, but with just making a name for himself and building that connection with
Mm,
followers. So I'd say that's the biggest difference. It's a very interpersonal, interaction driven platform as opposed to just your standard wrestling podcast.
how would you talked about there when it comes to what about the difference in like the way you podcast with Kyle compared to how you podcast with, because I know you podcast with a good lady that is Kate Elizabeth quite regularly. How would you say your chemistry is different?
So Kyle and I are still working it out because we've only done about five of them at this point, and it's it's tremendous. Kyle's the man. For some reason with Kate, there was like an instant click where you just sort of go, okay, I'm like, not only am I comfortable here, I feel like I've known this person my entire life. Like there's just the instant click of, okay, this works. And, you know, luckily I've been able to build that connection with not only her, but with Alex too. Got a great chemistry with Alex, Pulowski, and Cardoza because I get
Yeah,
to
definitely.
sometimes fill in for Kate on the SmackDown podcast. And really, like I said, it's all about just building that connection with Kyle. It's there, but we're still getting used to one another. And maybe by the time this even comes out, that'll be strengthened to a degree because we'll have done more. But I enjoy just getting to do it and getting to bounce off different people and get those different ideas because that's where to me you start to get into what's actually good about wrestling where different people have different viewpoints on where they like to see something go and how they'd like to see this go and that go, and I think that's the beauty of what we do.
Definitely. So you brought up there earlier in this conversation the fact that you want to do more podcasting if the opportunities come up, and the fact that you love the people you podcast with, and the fact that you want to talk about wrestling more. Put your wrestling media bucket list out there, my friend. Who would you like to work with, and things like that?
Oh, like working with the media. So Will Washington was up there, but he's a bit busy right now, so
Mm.
I don't know if that one's gonna happen anytime soon. Denise Salcedo is probably one of the only ones at Fightful I've never done a direct podcast with. I've been lucky, honestly, to have checked off a lot of people because I've done one-on-ones with Sean when I used to do the Wednesday night podcast. I've, even like a newcomer like Iridian Fierro, who's doing a tremendous job on the Collision podcast for Fightful. I've gotten to work with her in the past.
Mm.
I've I've been really, really lucky, but I would say the one name that stands out to me is probably Denise. And then for the hell of it, I would like to interact once with Dave Meltzer. I think
Yeah,
that'd
I'd
be a
like
lot
to
of
do
fun.
that.
Like just to get that experience and check that off the bucket list. Um, he's one another legendary name, Bill Apter, because just to be able to have that experience with a guy who really kind of opened the door that Meltzer then expanded into what we do now.
Mm.
I'd like that experience as well.
That's very, very cool, my friend. What about, because I'm going to ask you 5 names in wrestling media that you think deserve their flowers. Well, who do you think deserves more love in what they're doing and things like that?
Everybody knows it, but Jeremy Lambert's the best person to do what he does, full stop.
Mm.
Like, nobody does what Jeremy Lambert does. And he manages to not only create a name for himself and have fun doing it, but just legitimately be the very pinnacle of what we do. And I think he gets his flowers, but he needs even more.
Mm.
I would also say on the Fightful team, Colin Tessier, tremendous dude. He works in overdrive as well, and he's absolutely one of my best friends in the gig. I think he's just the very best in balancing between multiple websites himself and always giving it 110%. I don't know where he finds the time or energy, but he does it. Used to work for Bleacher Report, but does his own thing at Smart Cat Moment. Tony Mango is uh, first of all, I would be lying if I said I'd even be here without Tony. Tony like opened the door to WrestleZone and all that, but he's also just like the very most meticulously detailed individual I've ever worked with in my entire life. And he's just such a good dude. And he's one that I really think needs those flowers while he can still get them. So Tony Mango is way up there. As far as like the last two, you know, Meltzer, I have to say we wouldn't be here without him. So I do
Mm.
think Dave
Definitely.
Meltzer deserves his flower. And honestly, Low from Wrestling Wind Down, she's created such a cool platform and such a unique, not women first, but like it is a very like female centric gig, and I think she's absolutely the most professional person, and she deserves another like round of applause, and just absolutely deserves all the success she's getting.
Mm. 5 very good names there, my friend, that definitely deserve more love, in my opinion. You talked about earlier in this conversation the fact that you've never really known your life without wrestling and never not really loved wrestling. So, have you ever given any thought to like, what would you do if you stopped loving wrestling? Before we do the wrap up
Yes, I
questions.
have. Yes, I have. I have given that some thought because I've honestly look. Let's be honest. In the last 10 years, it wasn't like wrestling was the pinnacle of entertainment, and there was a lot of times where it's just like, it's kind of getting boring.
Mm.
Maybe now more than ever because there's so much and there's so much overlap. There's been times where I'm like, what would I do if I just like stopped today and went to go like do data analytics or just like any menial job that just doesn't involve covering pro wrestling. And honestly, for as much as I have thought about it, just in terms of like maybe needing a break, I always
Mm.
think, yeah, but I'll be back in 6 months doing exactly this because at the end of the day, I think wrestling and in the field of wrestling is where I always kind of want to end up.
Mm. What you talked about there, maybe burned out sometimes and stuff. How do you make sure that Robert is still a wrestling fan and not just works within the wrestling media?
That's a great question. That's something I think I actively have to do sometimes. And on occasion, that's just as simple as throwing on your favorite match. Maybe we live in a wonderful era with Peacock, and there's so many free matches on YouTube now that, like, yeah, I'll just throw on a Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon WrestleMania 10, a Royal Rumble 92, an Edge Eddie Guerrero SmackDown 2002 no DQ match, where I'll just go, yeah, yeah, I love that. Like that's it's so much fun, and it gets me real quick back into, okay, yeah, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to be doing. And because it does get hard, I'm not gonna lie. Like, look, where we are right now, there's a major show every day of the week,
Mm.
and sometimes there's overlap there with like Ring of Honor and Impact, and a lot of pay-per-views overlapping now. But at the end of the day, I have to remind myself, like, this is such a cool time because there's so much out there. And while I personally don't get to choose all the time, there's plenty of fans who do get to just choose what they love if they just want to watch Collision as opposed to that WWE pay-per-view, or just want to watch the indies as opposed to anything being offered on TV. So I try to
Mm.
remind myself that, this is the thing I enjoy. And most of the times I do that by just watching the matches in the era that got me into this in the first place. And then I'm usually right back.
What would your advice be to someone that is maybe suffering from wrestling burnout currently and maybe
Oh,
doesn't love wrestling as much?
okay. Well, it would depend on the situation. If it was somebody in my shoes where it's the gig, I would probably say try to minimize as much as you can from the negativity of it, because maybe that might be the thing that's burning them out. But if it's somebody that absolutely doesn't have to do this for purposes of a job, I would say find the promotions that cater to specifically what you enjoy and just cut the rest out completely, because
Mm.
that's all you have to do. As long as you cater to your interests, you're going to have a good time.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there, my friend. So, as we look at wrapping this up, Robert, obviously, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. Thank you for visiting me on Fightful Overbooked, Loving Wrestling. But the question I end this show on, my friend, is do you believe you will always love wrestling?
I cannot imagine my life without professional wrestling. I don't ever want to imagine my life without professional wrestling. So while I hesitate to say always, because you just never know what the future holds, I think it's a safe bet to say, in some way, shape, or form, I will always love wrestling, and wrestling's probably, in all fairness, my first love.
That's a beautiful way to end this conversation, my friend. So, as we wrap this up, most people will know you because of the channel and things like that. But where can the good people find your content and etc.?
Yeah, I mean, you find me every day on Fightful.com, whether it's Sunday through Saturday, I'm here doing something always. So Fightful.com, of course, support Fightful Select. You can also find my work on WrestleZone. You can find me in podcast form on Spark Out Moment. You can find me in podcast form on Fanboys Anonymous, Love Wrestling, most Thursdays with Kyle Sparks. And presumably by the time this airs, Kylie would have joined us by then. And you can find me everywhere at DeFelice on all social medias. And maybe, knock on wood, I don't know when this airs. Maybe this website, dudefelice.com, maybe that's a thing by the time this airs. But it'll be a thing soon. And I just appreciate you for asking me to be on the show. And again, very proud of you and what you're doing. And I hope that you always continue to find your love of wrestling.
I hope so too, my friend. And I really appreciate you always being so kind to me and just being incredibly nice. So, as we wrap this up, guys, make sure we get all the plugs in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Fightful Overbooked on this episode of Love in Wrestling. Make sure, as Robert said, you support Fightful.com. You subscribe to the main Fightful channel, Fightful Wrestling. Fightful Wrestling, I think that's right.
It's just youtube.com/Fightful. I'm pretty sure that's the channel.
YouTube.com/Fightful. Stupid brain. And you also subscribe to Fightful Select. Best $5 in the business. You can check out my personal work on Tom Talk Trash, where I interview some of the greats in wrestling media about their overall fan and how they maintain their fan, such as this fine gentleman that's been on in the past. Maybe by the time this airs, we will have something for wobbling about and rocking out, my new show that we'll have on there, but maybe. And anyway, guys,
I've done an interview there too with
He's done one of
Dom.
those as well.
Yeah, I've been over there as well. So if you want to learn more about me personally, my journey with cerebral palsy, that's probably one of the best interviews you can check out. So just support the guys everywhere. That's what this is all about, honestly.
Definitely. So as I say, guys, thank you for watching this, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.